Cain, the first Pharisee. Have you ever heard of such a thing in the Bible? I hadn't either, but recently I spent some time in Matthew 23 and Genesis 4, and I came to this conclusion that Cain was in fact the first Pharisee. Cain was a pious man who worshiped God, yet he killed his brother. So how can such a thing happen? How can this be? So let's get into Matthew 23 first, and then we'll go back to Genesis 4 and see the connection there. So in Matthew 23, Jesus is rebuking the Pharisees and the scribes for their hypocrisy. They appear outwardly very holy, very righteous, but inwardly they're the worst. They're full of corruption. So let me read some verses. I'll read 27 and 28 in that chapter, then I'll skip down to 34 and 35. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you resemble whitewashed graves, which outwardly appear beautiful, but inwardly are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. So you also outwardly appear righteous to men, but inwardly you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. And I'll go down to 34. Therefore, behold, I send you prophets and wise men and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify, and some of them you will scourge in your synagogues, and persecute from city to city, so that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah son of Berekiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. So the Lord Jesus is speaking to the Pharisees. They were a subgroup of Jews who were probably the most strict. They were very proud of keeping the law, and they had a lot of traditions and rituals. They practiced a lot of washings in particular, which Jesus himself makes this reference to some of that here in chapter 23. And so it's very interesting. In the midst of all this, kind of the conclusion of all the works of the Pharisees, they're full of hypocrisy. In the end, what summarizes their works is that they kill the true worshipers of God. That's the end work of a Pharisee. Kills a true worshiper of God. So let's go back to Genesis 4 and see how these two chapters tie together. So, and of course, I'm going back to Genesis 4 because the Lord Jesus himself makes direct reference to righteous Abel, that all the righteous blood shed on the earth from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah. So let's go back to Genesis 4 and see what kind of person Cain was. So in these verses, I'm not going to read all of them. I'm just going to pick a few sections here and describe to you who Cain was. So verse 2 says that Cain was a tiller of the ground. He was not a lazy person. He was a hard worker. Verse 3 says that Cain brought an offering to Jehovah. So he had some reference to Jehovah, and he brought an offering. This is excellent. This is a person who worships God, right? And so, yet, a few verses later, Cain kills his brother. So what's going on here? So, I'll read 4 and 5 actually as well. Abel also brought an offering from the firstlings of his flock from their fat portions, and Jehovah had regard for Abel and for his offering. And actually, I should read verse 3 beforehand too. Cain brought an offering to Jehovah from the fruit of the ground. I'll go back to 5 now. But for Cain, for his offering, he had no regard. So there was something happen here that Jehovah had regard for Abel's offering, yet not for Cain's. So if we look at what they offered, it becomes pretty clear what's happening here. So Abel made an offering from the firstlings of his flock. He was some kind of herder, shepherd, took care of cattle or animals, and so he took from the firstlings of the flock that he cared for and made an offering to Jehovah. Whereas Cain was a tiller of the ground, and made an offering from that. Well, why would Jehovah not be pleased with Cain's offering? Well, we have to go back to Genesis 3 and the fall of man to see why that would be. So after Adam and Eve partook of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and sinned, Jehovah does something very interesting. In verse 21, it says that Jehovah made coats of skin for Adam and for his wife and clothed them. So you can make, I think you can make a good assumption that Jehovah making a coat of skin indicates that there must have been the slaughter of some kind of animal to provide a coat of skin to cover Adam and Eve's nakedness. And this was the way that Jehovah took to cover the transgression, right, in Genesis 3. And so Adam and Eve must have told this story to their children, what happened. And so when hearing this, Abel had, he received what he heard. He received what his parents told him, and then put into practice the way that he saw God did things. So Jehovah had slaughtered some kind of animal to provide a coat of skin. So then he subsequently slaughtered a firstling to give an offering to Jehovah. This made Abel a true worshiper of God. He worshiped God according to the way that God wanted to be worshiped. Whereas with Cain did not practice what his parents had shared with him. Instead, he gave an offering from the fruit of the ground, which doesn't sound that bad. It doesn't sound bad. It sounds like a good thing, yet it wasn't in line with the way God did things. And it matches exactly the Pharisees. The Pharisees were very proud of their washings, all their rituals. They felt good about doing these things. It made them feel holy. They felt pious in doing these things, yet it was not the way God wanted them to take. And so this is the difference here between Cain and Abel. Cain is a pious man, yet he worships God according to his own way. He does not worship God according to God's way. He takes a different way. That is why Jehovah was not pleased with Cain's offering. So I just wanted to share that with you. I found that to be very rich. I hadn't made that connection before. And I really enjoy that and wanted to share that with y'all.